Hello and welcome again to another screencast edition of Autodesk Maya. Today we'll be focusing on Maya's animation features. So when I talked about a little bit about Maya, we focused primarily on modeling and knowing its user interface. We're going to go a little bit more in depth here today with animation and what Maya's animation feature can do for you. So as we know, we have our setup here from our outliner to a channel box and layer editor. On your user interface, you have several things that you need to be aware of. First off is basically your timeline right here. So on the very bottom, you'll see a bunch of tick marks right here. That is your timeline. This will help you establish in creating keyframes for your said animation. Secondly, on the bottom of your timeline is your range slider. Range slider helps you move and isolate any particular area of the frame of the animation. Maybe if you want to focus on a particular part in the animation that you want to edit, you could do that. Or if you want to increase the size of how many frames that you want within an animation sequence, you can either move it through the inner boxes of the range slider, or you could actually move the slider back and forth to whatever frame that you want to focus on. Now, right beside the range slider are the startup and the end time of the animation sequence. Usually by default is set to 1. For me, when it comes to animation sequence, I rather start by 0. So you can easily type in where you want to start, and it automatically fixes that up right here. So to tell the difference between one and the other, so if you look right here, this first part on the left is the start time of the animation. The second part from the left is the set start time of the playback range. So when you do the animation, you start from 0. It's going to start here. Now, when you're playing back the animation, when you're rendering, it's going to start up at that specific number that you put in. So, for example, even though I have the animation set up to 0, starting from 0, it's actually, when you begin to render, it's going to start up from 5. So keep the numbers consistent if you want to start from the beginning from here on that frame, so you won't have to worry. Same thing goes around here too. So maybe you want to end at frame 80 of your animation. It's going to be there. But also make sure you change up this here, because if you render, you'll pretty much have a blackout on the rest of the couple of seconds. That leaves a lot of dead air. You want to kind of avoid that as much as possible. So, of course, if I want the animation sequence to stop at frame 80, the playback, I'm going to have to do the same thing too. Unless you want to give at least a couple of frames of dead air, then you can. When it comes to advanced animation sequences with layers and everything, usually this comes in handy for regards to focusing on an animation sequence with a particular character that has one or more characters inside a sequence. So if you want to render, you could actually isolate the rendering of that animation sequence to a specific character or setting. If you look right here, this is your set menu for your playback speed. Usually with your typical animation is set for 30 frames per second. Please be sure to do that and change it up, and it'll help you work with that. Last but not least, another one right here, right beside your timeline is your playback menu. You could actually press the buttons right here to start and begin the playback. You could see right here the shortcut keys where you want to go, rewind, fast forward, so on and so forth. Last but not least is your animation preferences. Even though we set frames to 30 frames per second, you have to make sure that you also set the playback settings too. So if you go to your animation preference with that little icon of a little guy with a cog behind him, you'll see it's already opened up to the time slider. Now you see right here, your frames right here, it's set up. Now, I have my playback start from 0, end at 100. So whatever it has here, it should be set by default, so it should be no problems. Now you have, make sure to always change, by default, usually it has it in play every frame. Make sure you at least you set it up to 30 frames per second so it could go smoothly and run smoothly. So the frame rate could be more consistent. One other thing, when it comes to animation, the channel box and layer editor right here will be your friend, especially when you're doing a lot of keyframes. So keep that in mind when you're beginning to animate. This concludes today's screencast tutorial of Autodesk Maya. Thank you.